Hello, welcome to Unit 2 of EQ 111. We're going to be looking at crucial conversations in the workplace, as well as public civility. Before we get started and too far into content for this week, I want to check in with you about how last week went. You've turned in assignments for Unit 1, got everything in. How's it going? Are we okay? If it's not, please reach out to me by email, or you can come to office hours on Tuesday or Thursday. I'd love to work with you and cover anything that you have questions about or feel like you're missing. Reach out, please. I want to help you on this. Again, this class moves really fast, and so we are in week 2 now, but we're already almost halfway through. By the end of this week, we will be about halfway through the content, so we're moving quickly. One other reminder here, as we're getting into this week, we have midterms coming up. Your midterm is due this coming Sunday at 11:59 p.m. You'll see that on the syllabus. It opens on Friday morning, I believe. So you've got a few days to complete it, but you have to do it in one setting. So, and I believe you only have about an hour to do that in one setting. So, but you can take it anytime between Friday and Sunday when it opens, and then until it closes, it's available. Again, if you have questions on that, please reach out to me. But one really important thing with the midterm is that it covers both content from Unit 1 and content from Unit 2. So it's covering the stuff we did last week, as well as the stuff that you're assigned for this week, the readings. So it's really important that you especially do the readings for Unit 2 for this week before you take the midterm. Otherwise, it's going to be a mess, and it'll be like, what's going on? What are we covering? So read material from Unit 1 and Unit 2 before taking the midterm. All right, without further ado, let's kind of talk a little bit about the theme for today. Crucial conversations in the workplace. I like to occasionally listen to questions that happen on online forums, right? So whether it's Reddit or Quora. And the other day, I saw a question that came up that was really interesting. There was this person who had seen a coworker who had reported in sick for the day and hadn't come in, but they saw them out and about doing things, I think maybe at the mall or something like that, and it didn't look like they were sick. And the question was, should I report this coworker who called in sick but is clearly doing things? I thought the answer to the question was very interesting. The person answering the question said, no, do not report the person. It's number one, you don't know what is going on in the other person's life. And also it sticks yourself into a mess that's not your role or your position to deal with. The person then shared a story about how they had called in sick once and went to the doctor for their appointment, got prescribed some medicine. They went into the pharmacy to get it fulfilled. And there was some time where they were waiting. So they went out and they walked around the mall. While they were doing that, they saw a coworker. The coworker then reported them to their boss because this person was walking about the mall when they should have been working. And it created a really embarrassing situation for the person who was doing the reporting, because the guy had his doctor's note. He was able to say, hey, I went into the doctor. They prescribed this. I was waiting for the medication to get filled. I'm sick, right? So it created this moment that was difficult for everybody, and it was not the person's role to get involved in that. And I thought this was really interesting because it's a demonstration of an awkward communicative moment in kind of the workplace setting, but it also shows an understanding of public civility. This person who's answering the question understood that, hey, civility requires me to, one, trust the other person. We don't know what they're going through. They may be picking up their medication from the pharmacy, or maybe a loved one had died, right? And they were trying to take time to be with their family, or they needed a mental health day. There's 100 things, or they had a kid sick. There's 100 things that could have been legitimate reasons for not being at work that day. And then secondly, there's this piece of an understanding that to have an environment where we can do work together, we have to have a certain amount of respect and focus on our roles and what we're doing in the organization. And if it's not our role to be directly supervising someone and making sure that they're that they're doing something, then it's good sense, and it's also civil to keep to our role and to what we're supposed to focus on. There are a lot of excuses and reasons for avoiding work and getting things done, and being a busybody, being in someone's business can be one of those ways of avoiding work. So in this video, I want to explore three metaphors, three ideas, concepts that are related to what we're reading right now. It's not necessarily from the text directly, but they're things that help provide some coordinates for us as we're talking about crucial conversations, as we're looking at understanding incivility and uncivil behavior, right? These three metaphors that we're going to look at have to do with public and private spheres. And then we're looking at public civility after that. And then finally, existential trust. And we'll cover each of these three kind of briefly. So first, the public and private spheres. The idea of public and private comes from a whole bunch of different places of work, but kind of stems originally from an ancient Greek understanding of society, right? We have public life and private life. Hannah Arendt, the wonderful 20th century thinker and just idea person. She has so many interesting things. If you ever have time to read her work on whether it's the thing she did on Eichmann in Jerusalem, The Banality of Evil, was really good. It was a report on a Nazi, a member of the Nazi Party who had been instrumental in the death camps during World War II, and he had been brought to trial in Jerusalem, and she covered the trial. So she was also a reporter, and she had some really interesting insights on that. She also does some really important work on totalitarianism. So Hannah Arendt is a really foundational thinker for political philosophy and kind of practical ways of thinking about the world. But she dives into this idea of public and private coming from ancient Greece. And the idea of the private sphere, it encompasses our family, maybe if you have a significant other, a spouse, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, someone that you're close to. Some friendships fall into this realm of private life. It's an obligation to individuals. The private life encompasses our obligations to those people who are close to us, right? It's my responsibility to call my mom on Mother's Day. It's the making time for friends that I haven't seen in a while. Those kinds of things. We have this responsibility. It's doing dishes so that my partner doesn't have to come in and clean up after me, right? We have this private sphere that really it consists of obligations to other individuals that we're connected to with different levels of intimacy and relational connection. The public sphere, on the other end, often is made up of our coworkers, fellow citizens, right? Maybe it's in the context of Duquesne and the school here. That's a public sphere. And here, what's really important is the good of the community. It's an obligation to the community. We have this obligation to not litter because it kind of messes up with the environment around us. We have an obligation to follow the rules of the road. I can't run red lights whenever I feel like it because I have an obligation to the community, right? So we have private, which is often made up of obligations to individuals, and then the public sphere, which is often made up of public obligations that we have to the community. One of the things that Hannah Arendt explores is the idea of what she calls the social. So we've got public, private, but then the social is this weird, strange thing. She calls it a blob, right? I get this picture of these horror films from the 1950s where you have this blob coming after you and people running away going, ah, for your lives, right? The blob is this strange thing that happens when the private realm colonizes the public sphere. So the private takes over the public, and they kind of bleed together, and they become this weird blob. Let me explain what this could look like. So in private life, we have these things that are really important to us and that we that mean a lot to us, or they can be really happy and exciting things like getting married or, sharing moments that are really important, but they could also be moments that are really sad, whether it's struggles in a relationship or things that are not going well, a health diagnosis. Sometimes these things can be shared publicly, and they are shared publicly. That happen, but there's a certain level of these things that are very that can be very private or very personal. And when they come out into the public, they can create issues, right? There's a story of a woman. This is something from one of Dr. Arnett's books. We're looking at Dr. Arnett's book later in this semester, but he talks about a woman who had come to him for advice because she was frequently asked by her coworkers, "How are you doing? How was your weekend?" when she'd come back into work on Monday, right? And she told him, "I don't want to tell my coworkers how I'm doing when I go back into work because things aren't going well at home. My son is in prison and he's having a rough time. There's all kinds of care I need to do for him. And it's been a really bad weekend. What do I tell my coworkers?" Dr. Annette said, "Well, first, don't tell them what's going on in your private life right now, because the workplace had a history of treating people unfairly. And if she had shared those kinds of things, they very well could, in some ways, punish her for what was going on in her private life. So, for example, if she said, 'Hey, I've got a lot going on right now. My son's in prison. All these things are happening,' it might come up in a discussion a few weeks later where they're looking for someone to promote, and her name is on the list, at the top of the list. She's been doing good work, but somebody says, 'Oh, well, we shouldn't give her more responsibility and extra things on her plate because she's got her son in prison and all this stuff is going on. She probably can't handle it right now. Let's go to our second pick instead,' right? So you can see how some of these things, where if private gets into the public sphere, it could cause problems. Social media is a really big example of the private becoming public and kind of taking over the public sphere. So if you look at places like Facebook or Twitter or even LinkedIn, things like that, these places where private information comes out and we're expected to share that, have this authentic, put that in quotation marks, authentic picture into our lives, but they're so managed and they're so kind of fabricated, those glimpses into people's lives, but they can still cause problems. I mean, we've all seen the drama that comes out on Facebook that basically resorts to name calling, because you have people sharing information without any context of relationship, right? There's no reason to be civil with people. There's no connection. There's no repercussions for incivility, and so it just becomes this mudslinging competition sometimes. So, and that's some of the danger that Hannah Arendt is concerned about when the private invades the public. There should be space for us to have private lives as well as publicly facing lives, right? So we've got public and private spheres. Those are important ideas to keep in mind, but also there's public civility. So public civility is the idea of having a set of rules or guidelines or coordinates for our behavior when we're engaging with each other in the public sphere, right? So Dr. Janie Harden-Fritz, she's the chair of our department here at Duquesne, Department of Communication and Rhetorical Studies. A lot of her scholarship has to do with public civility. How do we treat each other in workplace contexts, in politics, in our interactions with each other? And a lot of what she leans towards, what she finds, is that public civility is about prioritizing common goods, things that we are able to hold in common with each other and aim towards. And it protects, public civility protects those common goods. So this is coming from communication ethics and the idea that there are things that we protect and we promote, things that are important to us that we label as good, right? So in a workplace, one of those big goods would be productivity, right? We're here at work to get things done, whatever that is, whether that's learning here at Duquesne, or whether that's selling paper at a paper supply company. Whatever it is, we're there to be productive. That's what we're being paid for. And that's a good that needs to be protected and promoted, right? Because you can start to imagine all kinds of ways that productivity could be lessened or be damaged by incivility, right? If people are playing pranks on each other in ways that are harmful or hurtful in the office, then that's going to damage productivity. That's going to cut away at what people can do. If people aren't able to trust that management is going to promote people fairly or give raises in a way that's equitable, then that's going to damage productivity. There are other goods as well, whether it's working in public service and trying to, when you're looking at like more mission specific things, such as if you're working for a nonprofit organization that's serving homeless people, you want to open more beds for people who are on the streets, right? There's all kinds of goods that are protected and promoted in an organizational context. Some other ideas of what public civility look like could be protecting and promoting the good of helping people save face, right? If someone makes a mistake and the boss or the coworker is able to help them save face and not fall flat and just ruin everything, right? But they're able to provide correction while also allowing that person to retain their self-respect and their dignity. I can think of moments where I've made mistakes, and I've had really good bosses in the past who have allowed me to save face in public, right? They don't call me on the carpet and start screaming at me and just laying out all of my mistakes for everyone to see. A good boss does not do that. Instead, the bosses that I've had that have been really good in the past have one, encouraged me to clean things up and kind of walked with me as I do that, right? So if I forgot something or I did something wrong, they make a space where I can acknowledge what went wrong, but then they help me functionally understand what to do next, how to move forward, right? And sometimes that even means my bosses taking some responsibility for what went wrong. I've had bosses who, at the end of the day, they're responsible for what I was doing, and so they've had to apologize and on my behalf without throwing me under the bus and taking responsibility for it themselves. And later we will have a conversation about what needs to happen in the future. Right? So there's all kinds of things. You can probably start to think of different ways that public civility is expressed in the workplace. So helping others save face, not being unduly inquisitive, right? Not pushing your nose into other people's business, allowing them to have a private life and their public engagement at the workplace, right? Being open to difference. This is a big issue that both Dr. Fritz and Dr. Arnett, who we'll read later, talk about the idea of approaching difference in other people as an opportunity to learn, right? When we see something that's different or a communicative behavior that's maybe different, we're not allowing ourselves to feel threatened by that, but instead see it as an opportunity to learn, hey, what are you doing that's different? And why do you do that? How can I respect where you're coming from? And still coming back to this, what is our common good? What is it we're here for, right? And finally, in addition to public civility, there's the idea of dialogic civility. And this is something that's talked about in Arnett's work. And I can't remember if he talks about it directly in the book that we'll be reading at the end of the semester, but he does talk about dialogue and about civility. And the idea of dialogic civility is that you have you treat others in a way that prioritizes listening, right? Dialogue has to do with two people sharing, there being space for both people to share. And so listening is a priority, and so is respecting the inherent dignity and worth of other people. Finally, the last metaphor I want to touch on is existential trust. Existential trust. In his work on existential trust, Arnett talks about it being different than individual trust. So you and I, we have people we trust, right? Maybe it's a friend who we know would be there for us if things all went wrong, right? The friend would get on a plane and help out, maybe it's trust of our parents or another loved one, an aunt, an uncle, someone who's been there for us, right? And individual trust works where somebody has proven themselves to us, maybe in some cases over and over again, that they are trustworthy and that we can rely on them, right? Existential trust is different. Existential trust doesn't rely on knowing the individual person or even seeing the other individual person's track record. Existential trust is a trust in the ground underneath their feet. Existential trust is more like trusting that I can go out and drive my car from my house over to Duquesne and get there safely because I have existential trust that people will follow the rules of the road. I don't know all those people. I haven't interviewed the 150 people driving cars that I'll pass on my way to work. That would take a very long time. But I do trust that by and large, I'm going to be safe driving to work because people are likely going to try to follow the rules of the road. And sometimes there are exceptions to this rule. People get in accidents. People are texting while they're driving. Bad things happen. But by and large, I trust in this system that exists, right? I trust in this thing that we've all agreed to, and they're the rules of the road. Existential trust works more like that than the kind of trust that I have with my dad, right? Because that's individual trust. Existential trust comes from what's talked about in the literature as narrative ground. And this is a kind of more advanced concept, but bear with me here. It's important. Narrative ground is made up of publicly told moral stories, the things we believe about the world, the explanations for why things are the way they are. So publicly told moral stories, they're made up of practices. So the things that we do out of those stories, right? So if my publicly told moral story has to do with Catholicism, Catholicism has moral stories that explain why the world is the way it is, right? And practices that flow out of that moral story include the sacraments. Maybe it's going to communion or confession that I engage in because I have accepted and believe in these moral stories, right? So publicly told moral stories, practices around those moral stories. And then finally, there's community buy-in that comes together through the practices and through the moral stories. And you have, in the case of Catholicism, you have the Catholic Church, right? You have this community that's come together around the moral stories and practices. And these narratives give room for existential trust, because even though we may not know the people individually, we can start to learn where they're coming from and begin to trust that. It's kind of like the rules of the road. We don't know everyone who's driving, but we know that by and large, people know to drive on the right-hand side of the road, to stop when we see a red light. And those things allow us to have some trust to move forward and let me drive from home to work. So existential trust is so important because it allows us to have relationship with other people, right? And that's something that it can be ruptured. We can have moments where we lose existential trust, but it's important to try to develop that and make room for trusting the rules of the road, so to speak, right? To be able to understand people's narrative ground. As we wind down this video, I'm looking forward to discussion board posts this week. I can't wait to see what you think about the readings. Maybe if you have thoughts on this video, have made you think of something that you want to share, please post that. I would really welcome conversation. I'll be there on the discussion boards as I've been this last week. But if you have any questions, please reach out to me again, and take care. Hopefully see you in one of the Zoom open office hours.